All right, welcome to English 123, week 5. Welcome back. So we're moving on. We're moving on to the next stage of the course. So hopefully at this point you've done some considerable research. I'm assuming you've spent a lot of time reading different sources, different articles, different books. You finally began to narrow that down to specific quotes that you are going to now use in your paper. You're now been narrowing down to maybe some specific ideas of how you want to approach your specific thesis that you've developed. So hopefully at this point, based on everything that we've done up to this point, you have a specific arguable thesis that is expressed in those three different stages: the what, which is the claim; the how, which are the three supportive points that you're foreshadowing that are going to come up in your paper, how you're going to actually support the claim, the what; and then the why, or the because part of your thesis statement. So remember, the thesis statement, from what you've been working on, is a single sentence statement that communicates the claim of what you're arguing, the specific points. It's foreshadowing the points that you're going to be discussing, the three main points. So that's the how, and then the why. It's the because statement. So I hope that your thesis statement is taking shape. I hope that you are utilizing the notes or the comments that I provided in the thesis statement discussion board post for those of you that completed it. So that's really the type of thesis statement that we're looking for in this class. It's not the only way to do a thesis statement. It's one way that I think is most effective. It makes grading much easier, makes it much more identifiable, it makes it very overt. I think that in this type of a English composition course, the more identifiable and overt your thesis statement is, the better off your grade will be, because an instructor, as myself, or any other instructor really for that matter, can really point to it and say, okay, there's the thesis statement, it's clear. Now I know for certain what the student is arguing, or what the main argument is of the paper. If it's not identifiable, if it's vague, or if it's kind of camouflaged, or if it's not necessarily concise, then that can cause issue for the gradability of the thesis statement. So remember, the thesis statement is the number one most important detail of the research paper. It sets the whole course of the paper. It's, remember, the nucleus of the research paper. It is the compass of the thesis statement. So wherever that thesis statement is oriented, whatever direction you're taking in that thesis statement, whatever you're claiming, that's where your research paper is headed. That's where it's going. So get that right, get that solid and set up, then the rest of the paper is going to come much easier. If the thesis statement is having difficulty, if it's vague, if it's unclear, if it's not arguable, if it's not specific enough, if it's too general, that's where problems are going to come in on the paper. That's where the composition stage, where we're headed right now, is going to have more problems than it really needs to have. So those things, that particular format or template that that we provided you for the thesis statement, is a template that will help you avoid those problems that can come up in the composition stage. So lately you've been doing pre-writing and development, you've been doing research, you've been doing, in a sense, data collection on that research, pulling out different points and hopefully maybe utilizing that spreadsheet, the idea that I gave you. If not, that's fine. Maybe a Word document, as long as you have something, some kind of research journal that you're using to store your quotes, or a notebook or a notepad or something that you're writing things down. However you want to do it, it's up to you. It's how you want to approach this process is entirely up to you. But as you see, there are specific foundational elements of the writing process that really shouldn't shouldn't change, but how you get there can change. Your own style can dictate how you want to do this. So hopefully at this point now you're ready to begin drafting. Ready to begin drafting. So for week 5, you're now going to do your first draft of your research paper. Um, so what does that mean? How do you get started? So I wanted to kind of take this overview video to kind of discuss the assignment, the prompt, some highlights from the prompt, and then hopefully give you some points on maybe how to get started, because there really is no definitive, absolute way to start a research paper. There's really no these quote unquote number one or absolute way of doing this. There are ways that are better than others, but then there's also ways that work better for you. So hopefully we'll kind of talk about that, and then I'll hopefully provide you what I think would be a good way to start this, maybe a way that I would start it. But you can certainly disagree with me. You can certainly say no, I'd rather do it this way, but at the same time, keep in mind the disclaimer for that is you can do it your own way, of course, but just know that then you're kind of left on your own a little bit, and then you're kind of left on your own with the grade that you could end up with. So I hope perhaps you would certainly consider pursuing your paper this way. And I'll tell you what it's not. It's not just sitting down and just writing out a first draft in one sitting and just, okay, I'm done. I did it. I wrote my first draft. There, I'm done. That's what I'd say don't do. I don't think that's going to result in the best grade for your draft that you could get. Though it is rough, though I'm not looking for, and we're not looking for, a polished, absolutely perfect first draft, wow, you don't need to go through this process. It's not even necessary for you. You can just sit down and write this paper in one draft. I mean, you might be that good. But then it could also be the other way around. I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to invest. Or I don't have time for this. I'm not interested in this. It's really not really that important to me right now. I'm not going to really engage this process that much. I'm just going to get a rough draft down, and I'll submit it, and I'll get my grade, and then I'll just move on, and then this course will be over, and I'm on to my next class. Those are two extremes that I would certainly encourage you to avoid. The one that is, shooting for the absolute perfect draft, which for some could be possible, and then the other extreme is not really engaging, not really investing the time, and just trying to just get something on paper and just move on. And that's also certainly a possibility for some people as well, for anybody in the class. So any one of you could really be at any one of those extremes. But I hope and I encourage that you would take more of a balanced approach, a more methodical and more thought out approach than that. Because I've seen students typically don't fall on the perfect first draft stage. That's really just a myth. Okay, so really it's going to be something less than perfect, and which really could end up really being detrimental to your grade. So don't try to write a perfect first draft, and don't dismiss this particular part of the process, even though there's temptations to do that, and even though there's pressures to do that because of perhaps things that are going on right now, things outside of school, or maybe even with school. Maybe there's other classes and other papers that you have. But I would hope that you would go for the balanced middle road approach to this. Gain a lot, but don't expect perfection in this first draft, because that's not what we're after right now. So anyway, to move on, I just want to kind of go through the prompt a bit and then kind of discuss what I think would be a good approach. And it's just a seed to get you started, because really this process is up to you. This part of the process, how you're going to begin to draft your work, is now up to you. It's different for everybody. So this is just one way. So anyway, let's look at the prompt. So the prompt specifically for your research paper, arguing a position draft 1 for week 5. I'm not going to read through the entire prompt, but you're going to obviously draft a rough draft for your research paper based on your thesis statement, based on your claim that you're going to make. You've picked a topic and you've now picked or crafted a specific position on that topic, and now you're going to write the paper based on the supportive evidence that you've found in your research. That's where we're headed. So the entire class is focused on a research-based 10-page arguing a position paper. That's the class, is this paper. Okay, so you will be taking a position on a topic that matters to you and trying to convince your reader of that topic through logical argument, the logos, presenting yourself as a trustworthy writer, the ethos, your credibility, and appealing to the reader's emotions and values, the pathos. With carefully employed research, your essay should include the following. So here are the key features. Now I just read the first paragraph of the prompt. The key features that this first draft is expected to have. A clear, arguable thesis. We've been working on that for 5 weeks. So that's something that's necessary. And I continue to emphasize that because it's such an easy thing to overlook and to pass off. A clear, arguable thesis, number 1. Number 2, necessary background information. So remember I've said that you want to help the reader understand the context and historical background of your topic and your argument, as well as an orientation to the research that has been taking place and where your particular paper fits into some kind of gap within that research community. You know, what value is your research filling? What gap value are you filling? Where are you bringing value with this particular research topic and your particular argument? Okay. The third item here, good reasons. So your research paper is being supported with good reasons, not only for good reasons that support your thesis, but your intentions are good reasons. You're writing this with good intentions and it's being expressed, not necessarily explicitly, but as I said, there is a sense of purpose, there's a sense of value that is implied within that writing. So there's some implications there in the writing that the reader needs to be able to infer on the reading. Fourthly, convincing evidence. That's your research. Those are your sources. Those are the scholarly, peer-reviewed sources that you've hopefully discovered in the library. Of course, you likely have access to the internet. Google's not necessarily going to find you scholarly, peer-reviewed articles necessary for your research. As I said before, the library holds multitudes of collections on journals, published scholarly journals, and these journals are expensive. They're top quality. These are journals that other universities are using, like USC, UCLA, Stanford, top rated universities are using the same type of research is available to you, that's available to, top-rated research institutions. So I hope that you've taken advantage of that. If you remember our discussion about scholarly and consumer-based .com type internet online research, online sources, those are not scholarly. Scholarly peer-reviewed articles are from the library databases. You can use .com sources as anecdotal, illustrative, kind of set the context type of things, but it's not necessarily scholarly research. Okay, so that's for number 5. It appeals to the reader's values. So there are some assumptions being made in your writing. You know your audience. It's the rhetorical situation. I have an understanding of this it may be hypothetical, but you have an understanding of this hypothetical audience that you are writing to. It's an intellectually, academically minded audience that wants to read your academic paper. That's what we're assuming here. So you have an appeal to the reader's values. What do they value? What do they want to know and understand? And where can they be challenged in those values? Those values can be those opposing views, those opposing arguments that you may be trying to overcome. But you need to demonstrate that you know and can appeal to those values, whether conceding to those values or then challenging those values. It's really up to your rhetorical situation with how your paper, the context of what your paper is in. Okay, further, a trustworthy tone. So you have good intentions with your writing. You're not necessarily trying to trick anyone. You're not trying to fool anyone. You're not trying to exaggerate. You're not trying to falsify. You're not trying to just write something that is trying to fool somebody into thinking a certain way or taking on a certain opinion. There is a sound, trustworthy professionalism. That's what I think where that trustworthiness is coming from. There's a professionalism in your tone. It's not condescending, it's not antagonistic. It is a balanced, neutral tone that is professional, that is academic, that is intellectual, that is, has integrity in its writing and its argumentation and its research. So that's also inferred from the reader. Okay, I get the sense that this writer, they know what they're talking about, and they're credible. They're someone that is sound and reliable in what they're saying, and I really want to consider it. I respect what they're saying. That's something that really does build respect. So following that, number 7, careful consideration of other positions. So I already said that the values can be those other opposing views, but other positions, just that there's a multitude of different views that can be taken on any given topic, and that you're aware of those different multiple views, not necessarily in depth, but you have an awareness that your view is not the only view, and your view is not necessarily the best view, nor is it the only view or the view that anyone ought to necessarily rally behind per se, but we're really just going for a consideration here. We're never really out for necessarily a finality to our position. Like I've said it and that's it, that settles everything. You need to just accept what I say. Now, of course, as individuals that have perhaps a Christian worldview, there are elements of the Christian worldview that are settled in our hearts and our minds. There are particular doctrinal and theological views that are settled in our mind, but it's not necessarily talking about issues such as that. It could be your opinion on certain things, your argumentation on certain things that are that maybe aren't necessarily dogmatic. I would say the deity of Christ is it is an essential tenet of the faith, right? But you're not necessarily dealing with something like that. You're dealing with whether a policy should be enacted. Something that has to do with perhaps animal research or animal testing or tax rates, things like rights and equality, issues on abortion. Now, of course, issues on abortion for those of faith can become a black and white issue. That is one of them. But if you're taking that kind of a view, understand that there are nuances to those views. There's nuances, and it's not necessarily always cut and dry. And there's things that can become complicated. That there's complications in these other views. So we want you to demonstrate that you have an understanding of the complications in the views that surround the topic and the argument that you're dealing with. That it's not just a once and for all settled by what you're saying and what you're bringing to the table. So I don't want to go too far on that. But anyway, So that's what we're looking at with the specifics, the following key features. I mean the key features that we just discussed. That's what we want to see in the research paper. Now, as I said, key word here is rough draft. We understand we're not looking for a perfect draft. So there is room for to really excel on this. There's room for this to really produce something that, though it's rough, it's quality, and it can really boost, hopefully your score and your grade based on how well you write to the rubric. So I'd strongly recommend reading through this prompt. If you see in the third paragraph, final paragraph, it's going to discuss the grading. So I'll just briefly read through it here. Since the essay is not expected to be a polished and complete, yet you can still earn an A on this draft by scoring an accomplished range from the rubric. So I want to strongly recommend reviewing the rubric and writing to that rubric. And the accomplished range is a 90, but it's not. There's a broader range on this, and there's a broader opportunity to really gain a high score if you're really engaging the assignment and really hitting those points. Those points are not listed there just as suggestions. That's really what we want in the assignment that's turned in. So please take the assignment prompt into full consideration. Full consideration. Each detail is there for a specific purpose and a specific reason, of course, and it does correspond specifically to the grading. Unfortunately, it's a disservice to you just to turn in an assignment just based on how you choose to just do the assignment. I mean, you can certainly do that, but again, it's going to unfortunately negatively affect your grade to not give consideration to the prompt. The prompt is the assignment. To turn something that does not follow the prompt, unfortunately, is a difficult situation, not only for grading purposes, but it's a difficult situation for you because then you won't receive the credit that you could very well earn. So anyway, prompts are very important. So very, very well read the prompt thoroughly, carefully, write to the prompt, write to the rubric, and the grade will take care of itself. If you give an earnest attempt at the prompt and the rubric, then that will hopefully show itself to be you've learned thus far in the course the things that we've are expecting and to expect to see in the writing and the development. And as I said from the very beginning, it's a process of development, and we want to see that development in these next 3 weeks. We want to see that you've engaged these principles and these exercises, and now you're beginning to implement them and demonstrate them, though not in finality and in perfection. Not even when you finish this course are you going to be writing perfect papers, but it's something that will carry on throughout your other courses. Okay, so here, how are we going to do this? How are we going to begin this paper? Well, essentially, you're just going to just start writing. I know that sounds overly simple, but you just need to just begin writing. And I say that because often, most often, too often, you can sit there in front of a blank page, a blank Word document, and an hour can go by and you have 2-3 words down. 2-3 sentences down and not much content. That can be it's a painful experience. It's an agonizing experience because you're under a lot of pressure. You're under a lot of expectation to produce something, and so you have this blank page that's staring back at you, taunting you, in so many words, to actually now begin to write something. So my suggestion is really just to sit down and start writing. Now that will then begin to develop. Now don't put expectations on that writing in the beginning. Just get something down, a thought, an idea. Start with the thesis statement and work your way through there. Don't necessarily think about a formal structure just yet. Introduction, body, conclusion. Don't think about that. Just start writing and let that begin to flow into paragraphs and content. Okay, just start getting things down on paper. But how do you do that? Well, I would begin by doing some degree of free writing. Start off with just, no grammar in mind. Don't really think about grammar. Don't think about structure. Just sit down and begin to do some degree of free writing. And I say that because there can be a temptation to begin to start um, revising and editing as you're writing all in one stage. We don't want to do that. We just want to get some content down to work with. We want to get some clay in our hands and begin to form it. Okay, we're not necessarily going to get to the work of art just yet, but we want to get some substance together, in our hands. Um, so it's a good art analogy, works really well with composition because it's something that just becomes as you work with it. It begins to take shape as you work with it. So, but you have to get some clay in your hands before you can actually begin to work with the paper. So a degree of free writing in the beginning, but again, it doesn't stay rough. The pre-writing, you don't want to just turn in free writing. You don't want to just turn in just something that's just no you don't want to turn in a paper that has no consideration to grammar, no consideration to structure. That's just where you start. So you're going to work on that, of course, as you revise and refine your first draft. So just begin to write in some degree of free writing, then start working on it. Perhaps from there you can then begin to outline your paper. If you know where if you have some idea of some of your points and your thesis statement is really well crafted at this point, begin outlining the thesis statement, your main points, and then maybe some of your subpoints just to get a structure together, and then begin to kind of shape it and mold it in sections. You don't necessarily have to work from the very beginning and to the end. You can work in different parts of the paper to where you begin to build up content in different areas and you can begin to link them together. And I would kind of call that blocking. And you kind of block out, maybe you have a particular point that supports your thesis and you have some sources behind it. You can begin to block that out, free write that, and then begin to craft it and then move on to maybe another main point and block that out to where you have blocks of information in your paper and they're not necessarily linked together just yet, and they will be as you begin to revise. And then you can then layer in, fill in the blanks and fill in the detail, the nuance of it as you begin to work through it. Okay. Now again, this is just one approach. So it certainly is up to you. But I would begin by doing some degree of free writing, maybe incorporating some outlining as well to see, kind of map out where you want to go, get an idea of where your paper is going to go. And as you're incorporating the free writing with your outline on those particular points in that particular order, then you can block out the paper and then begin to fill it in as you go, as you begin to revise this first draft. So, but I would avoid just sitting idle. If you begin to get stuck in a certain point and you don't move on to something else, move on to a different part. Okay. If you are working on point A, move on to point B, skip to point C, maybe work on your introduction. You don't have to necessarily write the paper from start to finish in chronological order. You can go through it as you want and then begin to splice it together. That can really be beneficial for some. If you want to start in chronology, you can do that. It's up to you. If you want to start with your introduction and work on that, and just get it roughly, roughed out, kind of sketched out, that's fine. And then move on to, your first point for your first paragraph, sketch that out, next paragraph, sketch that out, and just begin to roughly work it out. As I said, blocking it, and then go back and then fill in those layers and fill in those, more content, more detail, more explanation. That works also. So you can do whichever you feel is going to work out for you best and however you want to approach it. I would take down notes. You can take down notes and just kind of strategize. This strategy is going to be really important here. How you want to approach particular paragraphs, particular points. Again, it's all, this is the big picture here of how the whole paper is working. but you can hone in on a specific paragraph and just work on that one paragraph. But don't stay idle or don't get stuck in one spot for too long. If you do that, then you begin to waste more of your time. And in an 8-week course, that time just eats up really quickly. Okay, so that's really want to leave it at there. I don't want to go too long. I've already gone probably over what I intended for this first video. It's already a half an hour. But that's kind of how I wanted to get you started on this paper. If you have any questions, again, you're free to go another way if you like, but I think this will probably be a good start for you. All right, if you have any further questions, please let me know. And we have 2 other videos for this week as well, talking about composition. All right, thank you.